My name is Sophia Reynolds, and I'm 32 years old. If you looked at my family from the outside, you'd probably think we were picture perfect, successful parents, a beautiful house in the suburbs of Silver Grove, California, and three well-dressed children who never wanted for anything. But what people never saw, what no one wanted to see, was how perfectly broken it all really was. I was the oldest. Then came my twin brothers, Brandon and Tyler, born just 2 years after me. From the moment they arrived, it was like I had become invisible. My parents, Jennifer and Oscar Reynolds, ran a major tech company, one of those sleek Silicon Valley firms that made apps you didn't even know you needed. Jennifer was the COO, Oscar was the CTO, and together, they were seen as industry powerhouses. To their colleagues, they were modern innovators. To their children, well, to me, they were emotionally distant perfectionists who measured love in achievements and paychecks. Growing up, the favoritism wasn't loud. It was subtle at first. Brandon would break a lamp, and I'd get scolded for not stopping him. Tyler would cry for a toy, and I'd be told to hand mine over because you're older. I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to make them proud. But by the time I turned 12, it wasn't subtle anymore. I had been dreaming for months about a beautiful interior design kit I saw online. Nothing fancy, just a curated set with fabric swatches, a layout sketchpad, and tiny samples of wallpaper. I had hinted so many times, even printed the product page and left it on Mom's desk. I hoped, desperately, that they'd notice, that they'd show, just once, that they were listening. On my birthday, I got one box. I tore it open, my heart pounding, and inside was a coding workbook. From Mom and Dad. For your future, the note said. I forced a smile while Brandon unwrapped a new gaming console and Tyler showed off his remote-controlled drone. I remember sitting there with my fake smile and a stomach full of hollow. As we got older, the gap only widened. Our family vacations were chosen by Brandon and Tyler's interests, snowboarding in Aspen, jet skiing in Miami, camping in Utah's national parks. I wanted to visit New York City to see architecture exhibits, or walk through antique markets in Charleston. Every time I suggested something, it was brushed aside. We'll do that next time, Dad would say with that dismissive wave of his hand. Let the boys have their turn. College made things worse. I had fallen completely in love with interior architecture and space design. I'd spend hours rearranging my bedroom, sketching layouts, watching design shows. I wanted to make spaces that made people feel something. Safe. Seen. Whole. When I told my parents I wanted to major in interior design, my mother actually laughed out loud. Sophia, she said, adjusting her smartwatch and barely glancing at me. That's not a real degree. Brandon leaned against the kitchen counter with that smug grin he always wore. You should do something useful, Sophia. Like AI programming or data science. Dad nodded approvingly at him, like Brandon had just solved climate change. Me? I disappeared again. But despite their opinions, I applied anyway. I got accepted into a well-ranked design school with a scholarship that covered half the tuition. I was thrilled, almost breathless with excitement. I rushed into the living room where my parents were seated with glasses of wine and startup pitch decks open on their tablets. I got in, I said. And I got a scholarship. Jennifer didn't even look up. That's nice, honey. Brandon just got accepted into a summer tech incubator. His idea might be funded. I stood there, the acceptance letter shaking in my hand. I should have gotten used to it by then. But somehow, it still hurt every time. When the time came for me to move out, my parents didn't even offer to drive me to the dorms. They said they were traveling for a conference. I packed my suitcase, took the local commuter bus, and left quietly. The only person who showed up to say goodbye was my grandmother, Evelyn. She met me at the bus station with a thermos of tea and a soft hug. Sophia, she said, you're brave. I'm proud of you. Don't let their coldness turn you cold, too. Before I boarded, she slipped a white envelope into my hand. It was a small check, not life-changing, but enough to buy my textbooks and a proper desk lamp. But more than the money, it meant she saw me. She believed in me. And in that moment, that was everything. College life was a strange mix of freedom and struggle. On one hand, I was finally out of my parents' shadow. No more forced tech events. No more comparisons to my brother's startup ideas. I was in a world where creativity actually mattered, where my interior design sketches were celebrated, not mocked. On the other hand, I was constantly scraping by. Scholarships helped, but they didn't cover everything, and I worked 2 part-time jobs to pay for rent, art supplies, and books. Meanwhile, my brothers were living lives straight out of an Ivy League catalog. Brandon and Tyler attended elite universities, both fully funded by our parents, of course. They posted photos from $2,000 a night ski lodges, high-end rooftop parties, and spring break trips to Italy. My social media? It was full of secondhand decor projects, night shifts at a coffee shop, and library floor naps. My calls home got shorter and less frequent. I tried, sometimes, to share a win like getting chosen to lead a student design team, but the response was always cold. "That's cute," Mom once said. "Did you hear Brandon got selected to speak at a national tech conference?" Sometimes I wondered why I even bothered. But one person never failed to cheer me on, Grandma Evelyn. She called every week, sometimes just to ask what color schemes I was working on. She'd send little gifts now and then, a new set of pencils, a thrifted design book, even a homemade quilt with my name stitched in the corner. It was her way of saying, "I see you." Then came the spring of my final year, when Jackson entered my life. He was sitting alone in the campus lounge, hunched over his laptop, wearing a wrinkled hoodie and oversized glasses. He looked completely lost in his code, but I couldn't help noticing the hand-drawn characters sketched beside him. I was intrigued. We started talking, first about his game project, then about everything else. Jackson wasn't like the polished, arrogant tech bros my brothers surrounded themselves with. He was genuine, thoughtful, and passionate in a way that made you want to believe in him. He had big dreams, developing indie games with heart, not just hype, and even though his earnings were unpredictable, his vision was magnetic. We started dating. Slowly at first. Study sessions turned into coffee dates. Weekend hangouts turned into sleepovers. He understood what it felt like to be the underdog, to build from nothing, to dream against logic. I was in love. Not just with him, but with the life we were building, messy, imperfect, but ours. When graduation came around, I invited my parents. They came, but only for an hour. They brought a generic flower bouquet and spent most of their time talking about Brandon's startup and Tyler's fellowship. Dad asked, "So, what are you doing now?" And when I told him I'd accepted a junior designer role at a local firm in Los Angeles, he nodded vaguely and said, "Just make sure you don't depend on anyone." They left before I even walked across the stage. A week later, Jackson and I moved in together in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of downtown LA. The kitchen barely fit 2 people, the carpet was older than me, and we had to eat dinner on boxes for a month, but we were happy. We both worked long hours, me designing retail spaces for small businesses, Jackson coding late into the night, but we made time for each other. We shared dreams over dollar store wine, danced in our kitchen when rent got paid on time, and made big plans for a future with more than just getting by. 2 years passed. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Then one evening, after a quiet walk along the boardwalk, Jackson knelt down on the sand and proposed. I didn't need a diamond or a rooftop drone show like Tyler's proposal video. I just needed that look in his eyes. The one that said, "You matter." I said yes. The next day, I called my parents to tell them the news. They weren't thrilled. "That's fast," Mom said flatly. "Have you thought this through? You're still building your career," Dad added. "And Jackson isn't exactly stable." I bit my tongue and stayed polite, hoping things would change. Weeks went by. Jackson and I started planning a small, cozy wedding at a local community center. We wanted simple flowers, handwritten vows, homemade desserts. We weren't aiming for Pinterest perfection, just something meaningful. But as we drafted the guest list and crunched numbers, our budget started looking painfully thin. We decided to reach out to our families, not for money, but maybe for support, advice, help with the food, anything. When I asked my parents if they could contribute or help plan, their response wasn't just cold, it was cruel. "Sophia," Mom said, "you're an adult. If you've chosen this life, You need to handle it. No offer of help. No curiosity. Just rejection. A week later, a small white envelope arrived in the mail. I opened it, hoping maybe it was an olive branch. Inside was a $50 bill and a sticky note. 4 decorations. Dear Best. I sat in the kitchen and stared at it for what felt like an hour. My brothers had each received $1 million as wedding gifts. Lavish parties, destination honeymoons, down payments for homes. Me? $50 and mockery. I didn't cry. Not that night. I just turned to Jackson and said, "Let's make this the most beautiful $50 wedding they've ever seen." Planning a wedding with a $50 contribution from your parents might sound like a joke, but Jackson and I were determined to make it beautiful, our way. We rented the local community center, the same one where my design firm had hosted a few small events. The manager gave us a huge discount when he heard our story. Our friends pitched in, someone baked cupcakes, someone else printed invitations. Grandma Evelyn personally hand-wrapped mason jars with twine and wildflowers for centerpieces. We didn't have a band or a professional photographer, but we had laughter. We had love. We had late nights folding paper flowers and playlist debates that ended in kitchen slow dances. Our wedding was built on heart, not hype, and that made it special. But no matter how hard I tried to stay focused on the joy, I couldn't ignore the looming presence of my parents and brothers. Against my better judgment, I invited them. A part of me, still wounded, still foolishly hopeful, thought maybe they'd come around. Maybe they'd show up as family, not critics. They arrived together, all dressed in coordinated designer outfits. Jennifer in a crisp ivory suit, Oscar in a tailored navy blazer, Brandon and Tyler both in luxury sunglasses and smug expressions. From the second they walked in, I felt the temperature in the room drop. They didn't smile. They didn't hug me. They just nodded stiffly and took their seats in the front row. I could hear their whispers from the stage as I stood under a floral arch made by hand. "Look at these decorations," my mother muttered to Oscar. "They look like a craft fair explosion." "Where's the champagne fountain?" Brandon snorted. "I've seen birthday parties with more elegance," Tyler added with a chuckle. I gritted my teeth and focused on Jackson, who looked like the only person that mattered. When I saw his warm smile as I walked down the aisle, everything else faded, at least for a while. The ceremony was short, heartfelt. Our vows weren't flashy, but they were real. I could feel every word, every promise. Jackson kissed me like I was his whole world, and in that moment, I forgot all about designer suits and million-dollar receptions. But the moment didn't last. At the reception, as guests lined up for barbecue sliders and homemade lemonade, I overheard Brandon showing his phone to some distant cousins. He had pulled up pictures from his luxury wedding in the Bahamas. And then we had a fireworks show, like actual pyrotechnics. Compared to this. He glanced around. It's like a budget school fundraiser. My fists clenched. I turned away, trying to stay calm, when I noticed something else. Logan, our cousin, was scrolling on his phone, looking at Brandon and Tyler's latest Instagram posts. And then I saw it. A blurry photo of Jackson and me cutting our small homemade cake. The caption read, "Congrats to our big sis on her budget special skull #DollarStoreDreams." Another photo showed our food table next to an image of a fine dining spread. Spot the difference. Sophia's wedding versus our Thursday lunch. The comments were brutal. "Ouch. That cake looks like it came from a gas station. Is this a parody or real? Did they get married in a storage closet?" But what made my stomach twist was a comment from Jennifer herself. "Boys will be boys, harmless fun." I felt heat rise to my face. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just teasing, it was public humiliation. I turned to my mother, who was sipping wine like she didn't have a care in the world. "Why would you post that?" asked her, voice low but firm. "Excuse me?" she replied with fake surprise. "The photos, the captions, the comments. You're encouraging it." She gave me a cold smile. "Well, Sophia, if you didn't want people to talk, you could have had a real wedding. Maybe if you hadn't thrown away your potential chasing pillows and curtains, we wouldn't be here." My jaw tightened. This wedding is filled with people who actually love me. That's more than I can say for you. She scoffed. Poor girl. Poor groom. I've never seen such a cheap, embarrassing excuse for a wedding. That was it. Enough, I said, raising my voice. You will not insult me or my husband. Not today. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to us. Jackson reached for my hand, his eyes wide, but I stood tall. You gave my brothers $1 million each when they got married. You paid for private jets, private islands, private chefs. You gave me a crumpled $50 bill in a blank envelope. That wasn't a gift. That was a slap in the face. Jennifer stood slowly. Don't you dare lecture me in front of people. You chose this sad little life. You chose him. I didn't back down. And I'd choose him 1,000 times again. Because he loves me. He believes in me. And he never made me feel worthless. And then, before I could finish my sentence, Jennifer clenched both fists and punched me in the head. The room gasped. Her fist struck the side of my temple, hard enough to make my vision blur. I stumbled sideways, catching myself on a chair. For a moment, the world tilted. My ears rang. I blinked and tried to steady myself. Jackson jumped between us, shouting, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Several guests stood up. Chaos erupted. I heard someone scream. And then, "I'm calling 911. A woman yelled, "Rachel," one of Jackson's close friends. I could barely stand, but I forced myself upright. I wasn't bleeding. I wasn't broken. But I was done. Jennifer didn't even look guilty. She looked proud. The room pulsed with disbelief. Some guests started to leave. Others filmed the aftermath. Then I heard sirens in the distance. The sirens were growing louder. Fast. Guests stepped aside as flashing red and blue lights lit up the community center's parking lot. Within moments, the doors burst open and 2 officers walked in, led by Officer Grant, a tall man with sharp eyes and a calm voice that cut through the chaos. I was still standing, barely, with Jackson holding me upright. My head throbbed, but I wasn't bleeding. I didn't need an ambulance. What I needed, finally, was accountability. Who called this in? Officer Grant asked, scanning the stunned crowd. I did. Rachel stepped forward, her voice firm. She punched the bride in the head. All heads turned to my mother, Jennifer, who now looked far less smug. That's ridiculous, she scoffed. It was just a family argument. These people are exaggerating. Ma'am, Officer Grant said flatly, we've already reviewed a guest's video. You struck her. That's assault. This is insane, Jennifer hissed. You don't know who I am. Doesn't matter who you are, he replied as he read her rights. You're under arrest for physical assault. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. Oscar stood frozen. He hadn't spoken a word. Not when I was humiliated. Not when his wife hit me. Not even now. His silence said everything. You're not going to stop this? I asked him, voice shaking. He shook his head slowly. You're overreacting, Sophia. This could have been resolved quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. Your wife assaulted me. In front of over 50 people. And you think I'm the problem? Officer Grant turned to him. Sir, we'll also need a statement from you. Based on witness reports, you stood by while the assault occurred and made no attempt to intervene. Oscar paled. I didn't touch her. No, but you didn't stop it either. Jennifer was escorted out of the venue in handcuffs, her face pale and trembling now. Guests whispered. A few recorded videos. And just like that, the power my parents had always clung to so tightly evaporated. Later that evening, after the last guests left and the lights dimmed, I sat with Jackson and Grandma Evelyn in the back room. Evelyn had stayed through the whole thing, holding my hand tightly during the madness, her eyes filled with pride and pain at once. I'm sorry you had to go through that, she said gently, brushing a hand over my shoulder. I'm not, I said. Not anymore. 2 days after the wedding, I filed a formal police report and pressed charges with help from a legal aid attorney referred by a friend. We had the videos, the witness statements, the bruises, thankfully not serious, but real enough to be documented. I filed 2 separate legal cases. criminal assault charges against my mother, Jennifer. She was charged with misdemeanor assault, but due to the number of witnesses and the public nature of the attack, her case was taken seriously. The court issued a temporary restraining order against her immediately. Negligence and enabling complaint against my father, Oscar. I argued that his passive role in the incident, coupled with a history of emotional neglect, contributed to the long-term damage. While he didn't hit me, his complicity had consequences. My attorney filed for maximum penalties, not just because of what happened at the wedding, but because it was a lifetime of emotional abuse wrapped up in one final act of violence. The court proceedings started a month later. I was nervous at first. No one wants to face their parents in front of a judge, but I reminded myself, this wasn't revenge. It was justice. Jackson came to every hearing. Grandma Evelyn too. Even Aunt Sandra, who had always remained neutral, showed up one day and sat in the gallery with her son Logan. I hadn't expected that. It mattered. Jennifer hired a pricey lawyer, of course, but even he couldn't spin the video footage. Her sarcastic comments, the punch, and her complete lack of remorse were all on tape. After 3 court dates, the ruling came. Jennifer Reynolds was sentenced to 90 days in county jail, 12 months of probation, and mandatory anger management counseling. The judge called her behavior cruel, deliberate, and deeply disturbing given her position as a parent. Oscar Reynolds was not jailed but was fined $10,000 for his role in enabling the attack and was issued a court warning and permanent no-contact order regarding me. They both appealed. They both lost. And for the first time in my life, the law was on my side. What happened next was both shocking and vindicating. Grandma Evelyn rewrote her will. She removed Brandon, Tyler, Jennifer, and Oscar entirely. "I'm tired of rewarding cruelty," she told me one night. "They'll have to live with the consequences of their actions." The family's reputation in the tech world began to shift. Investors grew wary after the assault case gained online attention. Brandon and Tyler, who had both been riding on the family name, saw partnership deals fall through and sponsors pull out. They weren't arrested, but they lost something they valued even more than freedom: status and money. I didn't smile at their downfall, but I didn't cry either. I was done waiting for them to see me. I had seen myself now. The months that followed the court rulings felt like a strange kind of calm after a long, endless storm. There were no more calls from my parents. No more humiliating texts from Brandon or Tyler. No more desperate attempts to win their approval. They had shown me who they were, and I had finally learned to stop asking them to be anything different. Jackson and I started over, one careful step at a time. We poured our energy into the little things: work, building our savings, eating home-cooked meals together, planning for something better. He kept developing his indie games. I took on more freelance design projects, cafes, studio spaces, even a few influencer home makeovers. And then one day, a new opportunity knocked. A major interior design publication featured one of my commercial renovation projects in a digital spotlight series. Overnight, my email inbox flooded. Clients, collaborators, offers I had only dreamed about. I couldn't believe it. "You're finally being seen," Jackson whispered one night as we lay on the couch, scrolling through messages. "Not just by others. By yourself." He was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. 6 months after the wedding, Jackson and I stood in front of our new apartment building in downtown Silver Grove. It wasn't massive, but it was ours, with exposed brick walls, natural light pouring in from tall windows, and space for both of us to work and grow. We held up the keys together and snapped a photo. That night, I posted the picture online, just one clean image of Jackson and me standing at the front door, smiling hand in hand. Beside it, I added a photo of Grandma Evelyn sitting on our new living room couch, her smile glowing, a handmade quilt draped over her shoulders. My caption read, "New beginnings. Old love. Built from grace, grit, and those who stood beside us." The post went viral within our circles. And just like clockwork, the messages started pouring in. My phone lit up with friend requests from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Polite comments from extended family who had once mocked me, suddenly full of praise. And then, the call I knew would come. I let it ring once.
Twice.
I almost declined, but something in me wanted to hear what they'd say. Sophia, sweetheart, my mother's voice oozed through the line like syrup. We heard about the apartment. Such wonderful news. We always knew you'd make it. Your dad and I were just saying how proud we are, Oscar added. We'd love to see you. Maybe celebrate together as a family? I almost laughed. As a family? I repeated. We stopped being a family the moment you turned your back on me. That's not going to change just because you saw a successful post online. There was a long pause. Don't be so cold, Sophia, Jennifer said, still trying to sound sweet. You know we didn't mean any harm. You meant every word, I said. Every slap, every insult, every time you told me I wasn't enough. You can't erase it with fake congratulations and fruit baskets. Think about what's best for the family, she pushed. That did it. What's best for the family, I said slowly, is that I'm no longer part of yours. And I hung up. A few days later, they showed up at our door. Oscar, Jennifer, even Brandon and Tyler, looking more uncomfortable than usual in clothes that probably cost more than our rent. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. Jackson stood beside me, arms crossed, watching them through the peephole. Evelyn sat on the couch, calm as ever, sipping tea. Eventually they left. We never heard from them again. In the months that followed, my circle grew stronger. Aunt Sandra visited often, bringing homemade meals and old family photos. Logan apologized for the online posts and offered to help with marketing my design work. He'd grown, I could tell. I gave him a chance. Jackson's parents, quiet and kind, became like second parents to me. They never brought up the drama. They just loved us, supported us, showed up. One night, Grandma Evelyn sat beside me as we folded laundry. You know, she said, family isn't about blood. It's about who stays when things fall apart. I smiled and nodded. I know. That's why I kept you. She laughed, and I felt something warm settle in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. A few weeks later, Jackson and I hosted our first real family dinner in the new apartment. The table was simple. The food was homemade. But the people sitting around it? They were golden. We raised our glasses, me, Jackson, Evelyn, Sandra, Logan, and toasted to everything we'd built. No billion-dollar inheritances. No grand shows of wealth. Just love, respect, and a future we'd carved with our own hands. I no longer needed a parent's approval or a brother's applause. I had something better. I had found myself. And I was finally home. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to like this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if you enjoy real-life inspired stories like this one, make sure to subscribe for more powerful content every week. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes walking away is the first step toward true peace.